Welcome to Technovation. Today's broadcast comes from a recent MetaStrategy Digital Symposium. It's a conversation on technology leaders with a growth mindset featuring Shaleen Devgun, the Chief Information Officer of Schneider National, and Atif Rafiq, who, until just before this session, was the President of Customers, Commercial and Growth, MGM Resorts International. He's since started an entrepreneurial venture. The gentleman who led the conversation was MetaStrategy's Head of West Coast Operations, Chris Davis, who joins me now. Chris, great to see you.
Likewise, Peter.
Well, Chris, as I just mentioned, the topic that you covered with these two executives was technology leaders with a growth mindset. Why did you choose this as a topic to feature at our digital symposium?
Well, I think if COVID-19 has taught us anything, it's that digital transformation has accelerated. And whether that was true before or after much of the pandemic unfolded, technology leaders are more and more looked to within their companies as sources of growth. How do we improve our customer experience? How do we derive new sources of revenue? And how do we transition from our traditional business models to data and information-driven companies and offerings?
Why these two gentlemen, Chris? Why did you think that Shaleen and Atif personify this topic so well?
What you might not notice on face value is there's a hotel and gaming company on the one hand and a shipping company on the other, but they both operate in expiring inventory. A hotel bed that gets unused or a game unplayed, a shipping container that's not completely full. These are assets, opportunities to monetize revenue that if they aren't seized are lost forever. And so there's a certain urgency behind both business models. There's also a massive amount of complexity, bringing many people to the same physical place, connecting people across the world from a digital gaming perspective, connecting complex supply chains across shipping. Much of technology is at the core of simplifying this complexity so that you get to a business model that creates stickiness. How do you build relationships? How do you improve relationships? And how do you start to capture higher profit margins as you build this digital forward brand that helps the company grow, scale, and outcompete others?
Thanks, Chris. Well, without further ado, let's get to our conversation. Technology leaders with a growth mindset featuring Shaleen Devgun, the Chief Information Officer of Schneider National, and Atif Rafiq, the President of Customers, Commercial and Growth, MGM Resorts International, in conversation with Chris Davis.
So, Shaleen, I want to start with you. You've been tapped to think about new growth opportunities for your company, freight power being one of the most notable ones. And I'm wondering if you can share, why did Schneider look to you, someone as a technology leader, to drive strategic planning and to help identify new sources of growth?
So thank you, Chris, and good afternoon. It's good to meet everybody. Atif, good to meet you. I'm sure it's my loss having not made the connection before, but I'm happy to do that today. So, getting back to the conversation, just a little bit of a context and who Schneider, all of us, hopefully all of you have seen our orange trucks fly our highways. We're 85 years old, quintessential American success story, man, post-depression, fourth grade education, sells his family car to buy a truck, and that today is Schneider. So one of the things about Schneider, incidentally, that attracted me to the company, my entry into the company was sort of non-traditional for this industry and for Schneider specifically. I came in as a consultant about 12 years ago, trying to disrupt transportation at that point by creating the first successful transportation exchange where you could basically define a standard unit of trade with this non-fungible product called transportation and then trade, be able to sell that like we've seen with energy futures. So that was my first sort of exposure to Schneider. I was, amazed at this company in Green Bay. You fly into Green Bay, you see more farm animals than people, seriously. And then when you walk into the doors of Schneider and you saw this company that was doing algorithmic platforms, before it was cool to talk about big data. I mean, they were deriving engine messages using that IoT information without calling it IoT information to make operational decisions across the value chain. So Schneider historically has, a reputation in the industry to lead the industry, and it has in pragmatic sort of tech-led innovation. So that's always been the case. Just generally, in terms of just overall growing business leaders. Schneider also has a reputation of growing business leaders out of tech. The CEO that hired me came out of engineering and tech. So, it's sort of part of the DNA. And, starting from my first gig as a consultant, trying to create that exchange, which again was probably ahead of its time. It didn't work. People are starting to talk about it again, but it's interesting to see what you could do now with that idea 10 years down the road. But that's integral to how we go to market. We're always looking to disrupt ourselves, whether it's through, creating the first two-way satellite, communication in the truck, whether it's launching the first completed end-to-end code-to-cash platform, using decision science to make decisions. So it's sort of integral. So it's easy, and it's easy to be attracted to a company that sort of celebrates that. And that was part of my story at Schneider, and has remained so. Chris?
Yeah, that's great, Shaleen. Thank you for sharing that. And Atif, I want to turn to you. So as we look at the history of your roles, whether it's at McDonald's, Volvo, and most recently MGM, you've made a bit of a habit of, as I think you put it, trying to get old large companies to think and act like Amazon. And I'm curious if you can share some insights of what's the process you've had to apply when trying to explore new avenues for growth, new sources of innovation in established companies with the legacy that the name brands that both you and Shaleen share on your resumes?
I think it's a very interesting question. There's a lot of facets to it. I mean, maybe let's start with where you spearhead this kind of growth agenda in the company. And so in general, I think what you need is to center it with, a working team, which consists of people who are very creative, but also able to deep dive into the realities. And through that process, you generally serve as many unknowns, and it becomes quite overwhelming, actually. And that's why companies get stuck. But you need people who are comfortable with those unknowns, and they're able to work through them and start to create some clarity. So in a lot of ways, what you're doing, I think the first step is really to shred down mentally, not physically, what the business is today, and build it back in our heads, reimagine it, if you will, in terms of how its purpose would be expressed in today's environment. Because, of course, Schneider's been around a long time. Volvo's been around for 90 years, McDonald's 60 years, and things have changed, but that needs to be unpacked. And so really trying to come up with a concept of what your business is all about that's future-proof, and then build a path to that. That's sort of the first step. And I think once you have that, and let's just call that a clear vision, how do you go about it? What I've found has worked well is making it using familiar language for your organization, because one person or a team cannot really move a whole company. You need the whole company in some ways to contribute. So I've found that speaking in familiar language that connects the long-standing purpose of the company is a good place to start. So just to give an example, when you think about McDonald's, really in my mind, McDonald's is about taste, value, and convenience. And when we think about digitization, that can really help on the aspect of reimagining convenience and making that something the company owns once again, because that has been redefined. And then also using familiar language in terms of what you're going to do about it. So we could talk about digital experiences, but in a company like McDonald's, better to call it a service model and say there are 2 or 3 ways to use McDonald's historically. What if we added 1 or 2 more? Wouldn't that be powerful? And this begins to then make the concepts very familiar, and different parts of the organization can begin to contribute to a common understanding of where we're headed.
Yeah, that's great. And Shaleen, I think you've done that in many ways, because I've heard you talk about Schneider as an information company. It's not necessarily obvious when you see the big orange trucks that would be the thing, but you've highlighted a number of cases where the company was already innovative before you've joined. And as you've approached COVID, in both cases, whether it was MGM or with Schneider, you had to make certain big bets. Agility doesn't come overnight necessarily. In some cases, it's establishing platform investments that create a foundation for agility and allow you to respond. So Shaleen, I'm wondering if you can maybe share some examples where, whether it's making sure that everything is contactless for the driver so he or she doesn't have to leave the cab, or starting to roll out new matchmaking capabilities for the driver and shippers. Can you just share some examples where you had to make some bets, but in re-envisioning what the company is, you were able to respond and adapt quickly to the changing landscape with COVID?
Sure, Chris. I'll take that question in sort of two segments, if you will. We're a data-intensive company. I mean, just for those of we're deriving about 5 terabytes of data from our moving assets. So think about tractors, trailers, driver wearables, fuel sensors, engine data. So our whole company, which is a network-based company, are one of the largest networks in the over-the-road networks in the country, comes together every day and a half with IoT data that's derived from our moving assets, right? That's always been the case. And our success, right? We when we went public about 3 years ago, our investment thesis was rooted in, hey, we're the Moneyball of trucking. It's about getting to on-base percentage. It's not about the one load, it's about the team. And that's what we do, right? I mean, that's our core operating platform, is to be able to maximize yield by making the right decisions. We're a decision science company, really, right? Masquerading as a trucking company, I'd like to say. So some of those things never change. What we've done over the last 2 or 3 years, Chris, is just, we're a capital intensive and people intensive business, right? As transportation. 2 of the easiest things to add to this business, people and capital. 2 of the hardest things to take out, people and capital. So one of the things that we've done without any knowledge of this, upcoming pandemic or anything was, hey, how do we define automation across our value chain? Rooted in simplification. Let's eliminate work. Let's move the human to a higher place in the value chain and use tech to do the commodity tasks, right? So those have been sort of efforts that have been underway. Now, we've had a lot of success, but we've also have challenges across our ecosystem. We've had challenges with our drivers in the cab when we're presenting them self-service options, saying, hey, you don't want to talk to me. No, we do want to talk to you, but we want to have you focus on driving. And we want to use technology to be able to go create the seamless and frictionless experience that you have with the company. Same thing with our customers on the demand-facing side of the house. And we've had sort of challenges. Hey, what do you mean you're not going to, the driver's not going to walk into my building and hand me over a bill of lading or something? That's how we've always done. There's going to be mistakes if you don't do that. Our freight's going to get lost. So all those things have been sort of challenges that we had been working through. And what the pandemic has done is really, it's such a sort of equalizer, if you will. We're all in the same sort of team now. And we've made more progress in the last 8 months around pushing some of those sort of initiatives around frictionless automation in yards that we've not had success, or we've had limited success for the previous 2 years before that. So, now it's expected that when a driver pulls up to a yard, you're not going to get out. We don't want a driver to get out. We want to say them in the sanitized sort of cab. So there's, we built a telematics platform, state-of-the-art telematics platform that actually now is a company called Platform Science that's doing business that Daimler just actually took a pretty large stake in. We're now leveraging those platforms to create customer-specific workflows that incorporate no touch, going into a yard, recognizing where the load is, where the trailer needs to be parked. All of that is happening no touch. Now, the technology existed, but the adoption was an issue. And what the pandemic has done is taken those sort of obstruction bombs out of the way, and we're seeing this rapid move towards adoption, which has been surprising and welcome.
Yeah, and Shaleen, I think just to build on that a little further, so obviously with Schneider and Atif, in your experience with Volvo, you're both familiar with advanced vehicles and the need to accelerate out of the turn. And so, Atif, I want to turn it back to you. So as you think about leaders and this healthy tension between long-term bets, but also near-term responsiveness at MGM, you employed a number of creative tactics, Viva la Office, among others, which you're welcome to talk a little bit about. But how should leaders be thinking about accelerating out of this term, where there still might be some softness in certain markets, but we don't want to be caught flat-footed when things start to truly accelerate? Can you share maybe a mental model, how you were thinking about it at MGM?
Well, I think a common mental model in enterprises is this idea of horizons, horizon 1, 2, 3, where Horizon 1 is we're essentially, the further out you go, the more in the future the opportunity is. So it's a timing issue, but along with that, a lot more ambiguity, but also where the growth lies. And I think for a lot of companies, Horizon 2 has become Horizon 1. So my advice would be get used to unknowns and so on. And change how you work, embrace business agility, empower people who are comfortable figuring out ambiguous problems, and obsess over these Horizon 2 initiatives, because the things in your day-to-day that are past expiration date, COVID really accelerated those things. And so what will fill the gap? And so really what I find when I step out of one company and look across different organizations, I find the very top leaders of the company obsessing over these Horizon 2s, because those are essentially going to become very core to the business model, sooner than we think.
And I don't want to lose the chance with people with unique purviews to think about a horizon that maybe it's a Horizon 2, maybe it's a Horizon 3. But I want to ask both of you where you see autonomous vehicles going, because Atif, you with Volvo, and Shaleen, no doubt in the trucking space, this has to be on the plan. But what are your predictions as you see the potential and opportunities, with some more in the consumer space, some more in the commercial space? And Shaleen, maybe I'll start with you.
So incidentally, we just announced a strategic relationship with TuSimple about 2 days ago. So we're joining TuSimple strategic board. So we've been in conversations. We're obviously in conversation with others. Waymo. We're working very closely with Daimler and their Torque. So we believe that the technology holds great promise. I will tell you that if you look at levels of automation, we have automation today. Atif worked at Volvo, which I believe they've been a leader in this space. In fact, I believe they're commercializing some of their technology to some of the players in the US, and they have been for years, whether by plan or just with folks moving back and forth. The fact that, hey, is there going to be a time when there's no one in the cab? If you leave that aside, because we can all argue about whether that's 5 years away or 15 years away, I think the industry is gradually moving to that sort of space. I will tell you that there are components of our value chain today. If you were to go to an intermodal station in Chicago, for example, you'd see level 4 automation in play, right? One of the things we're piloting with one of our national universities is an autonomous yard, where we're taking people out and we're using robotic sensor-based jockeys to go park trailers back and forth. So there are components, I think, as you look at intermodal within the space, you're going to see automation hit a lot sooner. As it relates to sort of the core over the road, I think there's going to be a lot of factors, right? Investments. Do we have the infrastructure? How much, depending on who's in the White House, and which, there's going to be a lot of pieces that go into how soon you're going to have autonomous lanes where you can start seeing.
Right.
We do see rapid sort of progress in the next 5 years. And I'll tell you this, as a consumer of some of these vehicles, one of the things we celebrate is our trucks today are a lot safer because of the research that's gone into autonomous and all of those things related. I think it's a win-win across the sort of spectrum, and we welcome it. Now, whether when we're talking about driverless, we don't think that's in the near future, but we think autonomous we're on that path already.
Yeah, I agree with Shaleen. I think he hit it on the nail on the head. It's really two camps. There are some use cases which are in controlled environments. I really love the one that you mentioned, Shaleen, because that is absolutely doable. The technology is there, and you can control a lot of the factors. And so that makes a lot of sense for us to see soon. And the business case is tremendous, certainly in trucking, in commercial environments like fleets for delivery, retail, et cetera. So right. I'm pretty optimistic about that. That being said, I think we all know that this has been through the hype cycle, and it's kind of on the downward slope of the peak of the hype. And so now it's like, okay, when is this actually going to happen for consumers? And, that could be a number of years, probably 5-6 years away from a reality, but I think it will happen. The product roadmaps or companies like Volvo, BMW, and others, with LiDAR and sensor fusion. Those are very real. It's just that there's lead time, and then the X factors are adoption, infrastructure, that kind of came up. So,
Right.
I think on the consumer side, it's probably further out than everyone
Right.
thought, let's say 2 years ago.
Yeah. Well, thank you both for sharing those perspectives. So the takeaways for me are, in order to have a growth mindset, rethink your company and what the essence of it is, put information and data at the center, and make sure that you're infusing that innovation throughout the company. Think about multiple horizons, platform thinking to enable agility. So thank you, Shaleen and Atif.